As a Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Baba Metzia Daf Tzadik Hey. So just before we begin, I just want to go through the psukim, so just so you're up to speed where we are. But I'm going to run through this, but basically, there are three types of shomrim that is discussed in the Torah. One is a shomer chinam. If you watch somebody's object for free, so then you're not held liable to anything that happens to that object unless you're negligent. Let's say you're watching somebody's bicycle for free and then you leave it out on the street, so on purpose. So you're negligent, then you're liable. But if it was stolen or it got lost or something happened to it, you're not held liable. That's a shomer chinam, watchman for free. Then this Torah describes, which is right over here, the Torah describes a shomer sachar, right? You get hired. So then you are a shomer sachar, a paid watchman. Hi, Steve. We just began. And we're talking about a paid watchman, and a paid watchman is held liable if the item is stolen because you're being paid to watch it. So if it's middle of the night, somebody steals it, you're held accountable and you have to pay back. However, if something not your fault happened, let's say, completely an oinus happened. Let's say that the animal broke, wounded itself and broke, or was taken captive against the shomer's will. So then the shomer sachar is exempt from paying. Then over here, and this is our discussion over here. Let's read these psukim. If a man borrows something from his friend, the nishbar oimei. So let's say the animal dies or got broken. So then the Torah stipulates that the borrower has to pay shalom yishalom, because the borrower has to pay even if the animal just suddenly plotzes and dies. Only if ba'olav ein imoy, if the owner has not taken a job by the borrower. In other words, if the owner is working for the borrower in some capacity, salary employee, or he's doing something for free, so then the borrower would be exempt from paying oinsim. We'll call it oinis. It's not his fault. Then the borrower would be exempt from paying oinsim. However, if the borrower is not there, you just borrow an item. You borrow an animal, and the animal just dies on you. You have to pay back a new animal to the lender. However, says the pasuk in Bal of Imoy, if the borrower is with you, lo yishalim, then you don't have to pay. Okay, because whatever reason that is, it's hard to understand why. Suppose you, and what we're going to learn today is that suppose you borrow an animal, right?
Yeah.
Borrow an animal, fine. Then you tell the owner of the animal, "Can you water my grass? Water my plants?" So since the owner is working for you at the time that you borrowed the item, the owner is working with you. So if something would happen to the animal, the borrower is exempt from paying because he has a connection with the owner. That's a very interesting thing. So let's read the Mishnah and then we'll just jump into the Gemara. Here we go. Mishnah is actually on Tzadik Hey Amud Aleph, on Tzadik Daled Amud Aleph, but let's read it inside. Hashoyel esapara, someone who borrows a cow. Vishal Bala Ima, and then he told the owner of the cow, do something for me. Let's say, help me plow with this cow. So you're going to see what happens. Or he hired the owner of the cow to do something with him. New case. Shal Balim Oisachram. First you hired the owner of the cow, or paid him a wage. First he was working for you. And then you borrowed something from him. And then you borrowed this cow, and the cow died. Potter, the borrower is exempt from paying. Shenama, because the pasuk says, "In ba'olav ima," if the borrower is there, lo yishalim, you don't have to pay, as long as the borrower is doing something for the lender, the owner of the cow is doing something for the borrower. The borrower will be exempt from all things happening to the cow. Now, avashol, but if you borrow the cow first, right? Then then you borrow the item. Then a long time you borrow the cow. You have this cow that you borrowed for a week, and then you tell the owner, "Oh, can you water my grass?" Then that's not called balav with you, because when at the time that you borrowed the cow, the owner of the cow was not working for you. So therefore, in that case, umesa, if the cow would die, chayev. Shnema bal v'iminu yishalem yishalem. So all you have to know is that really a borrower is the most strictest of all watchmen, right? Everybody, technically, when you have something that doesn't belong to you, you're watching it for somebody else. And therefore, if you borrowed an item, you really, anything that happens to that item, you're obligated to pay. However, it's just an exemption that you need to put your mind around, that if the owner of the item happens to be doing some work for you, let's say he's painting your house, even it has nothing related to the item that you borrowed, but at the time that you borrowed the item, he was doing work for you, so then you'll be exempt from anything happened to the item that you borrowed. So now the Gemara asks first understanding about the concept of a shoyel. We said a shoyel, a borrower, is liable for anything that happens to the animal, right? But look at the pasuk clearly. The pasuk says, if a man borrows from his friend, the nishbar mace, an animal got broken or injured or died, then you have to pay. Okay? What happens if the animal got stolen? Would you have to pay? That's the Gemara says. Geneva va'aveda b'shoyel menola. Okay, Sadik Heyamad Aleph, fourth line from the top. If you're a borrower and the item that you borrowed got stolen, right, or got lost, let's say middle of the night it got stolen, how do you know as a borrower you have to pay? V'chi tema, would you say? Well, it's so obvious you have to pay. Neilef mishvura mesa. A borrower, if it got stolen, you have some negligence because you maybe you didn't lock it up properly. So if you're chayiv to pay when something totally not your fault, certainly you're going to have to pay for Geneva Veda. So that's what you're going to say. V'chitem, are you going to say Neilef mishvura mesa? Let us learn from shvura, broken, or if the animal died, that if you're obligated to pay when it's totally not your fault, certainly a borrower is obligated to pay when it's somewhat his fault, right? So that's why. That's the kal v'chomer. So the Gemara says not so fast. Ma l'shvura mesa dole efshad lemitrach v'atuye. A shvura mesa, when the animal is totally dies, so the borrower can't tell the owner of the animal, oh, try to bring it back. I mean, it's a dead animal, so the borrower has to pay. But toimar b'gneva veda the efshad lemitrach v'atuye, that with gneva and veda, the borrower can tell the owner of the animal, yes, it got stolen. I'm sorry about that. But if you really want to find out, go to the police, file a police report, and maybe they'll help you find the animal. So why should I have to pay? So that's so the question is, how do you know shoyel has to pay? Ella ki hadatanya. Like the following is the source of where a shoyel would have to pay if the item was stolen. The nishba or mace ain't lial shvur mesa gneva veda menayin. Amrit kal v'chomer. The Brisa had the same question. How do you know a shoyel is obligated to pay when the item is stolen? So it's a kal v'chomer, and it's a very simple kal v'chomer. Uma shoymer socha, a paid watchman, shepota mishvura mesa. A paid watchman, if something happens not the fault of the paid watchman, he's not obligated to pay. Right? He's not obligated to pay. If the animal just dies and you're just a paid watchman, you're not a borrower, so then you're part of paying. Chayev, but in nevertheless, you're chayev b'gneva v'aveda, but you're obligated to pay with gneva v'aveda. Shoyal, a borrower, shechayev b'shvura mesa, shoyal is obligated to pay when there is no, when it's totally not his fault. And it didn't shechaya be'gneva veda. Certainly, you'll have to pay when there's gneva veda. So here, the kal v'chomer is slightly altered. The kal v'chomer is from a shomer sochar. A mad shomer sochar who's potter on oinsim when it's not his fault. He's chayiv on gneva veda. A borrower which is chayiv in oinsim, certainly it will be chayiv be'gneva veda. So the kal, the light one over here is shomer sochar. If the shomer sochar is chayiv in gneva veda, certainly the more strict one, the borrower is chayiv and gneva veda. Zel kal v'chomer she'ein olav tshuva. There is no way to refute this kal v'chomer. So the Gemara always, when you challenge the Gemara says, "What do you mean? There's no way to refute it? Your assumption is that shomer sochar is light, and shoyel is more stricter. Ma'elav tshuva. V'chitem ikla mechva mal shem misach shekem misham tishlum kevel between tais list mezuyim. Are you going to say that a shomer sochar can be more stricter than a shoyel? Because a shoyel can never come to a situation where the shoyel will have to pay to the owner double, but a shomer sochar could possibly pay double to the owner. What happens if the owner comes and says, "Where's I paid you to watch my animal?" And he says, "Armed vandals came and I got held up, and your animal was taken from me." And he swears. And then it turns out that this never happened, and the shomer sochar was trying to steal the animal for himself. So then he would have to pay kefil, double to the owner, and that already is a situation where a shomer sochar could potentially pay more to the owner than a shoyel. So a shoyel shomer sochar could be more chumradik than a shoyel, and so that refutes your kal v'choima. Kal v'choima only assumes that shomer sochar is kal, light one, and shoyel is the chumrah. But now we're trying to prove that a shomer sochar could be more chumradik, more stricter than a shoyel. So the Gemara says, not true. A shoyel is always more strict because a shomer sochar is not he has to be proven that the item that he swore that it was taken from him. You have to bring Eidim that he was the one that stole it, but it's a guarantee. But if not, then the shomer sochar is potter. But a shoyel is always obligated to pay that 100%, that keren, and therefore the shoyel is always going to be considered more stricter and liability than a shomer sochar. And if you want, I can tell you that even if a shomer sochar would swear falsely, and it turns out it was his, he's not chayav kefil, because kefil is only when you're tining that it was stolen, not listim, and he swore and the edim came, and since that can only be by a shomer sochar, which is pata and geneva, but a shomer chinam, which is pata and geneva, but never by a shomer sochar. Anyway, so a shomer sochar can never pay kefil, and therefore always shomer sochar is lighter than a shoyel. So now what the Gemara just proved over here, that geneva veda applies by a shoyel. That a shoyel is liable not only if it's no fault, if it wasn't his fault, but even if it was stolen from him, he's liable to pay. So now the Gemara says, Ashkechan l'chiyav. I find now a shoyel and a borrower is now liable to pay when it was stolen from him, liftur minolan. How do you know that a shoyel would have the patur of bal of imai by gneva veda? We know bal of imai by shvura mesa because that's written in the pasuk. That when the owner is working with him, so then there's a patur for the shoyel to pay. But how do you know that the shoyel will be patur from paying on gneva veda if there was bal of imai? Are you going to say Nelef Mishvura Mesa? Let's learn it from Shvura O Mesa. So that here the Torah says by Shvura Mesa, right? The Torah says V'nishbari Mes Ba'alav Imai, you don't have to pay Lo Yishalin. So therefore, learn also Gneva Vaveda, even though it's not written in the pasuk. If Ba'alav Imai, you don't have to pay. So the Gemara says, if that's what you're trying to say, so then Ma'al Shvura Mesa Keinoinus. Maybe the reason why Ba'alav Imai is an exemption because the whole shvura mesa is a no fault. It's not your fault, and therefore bal of imai is an exemption also. But if there was gneva veda where you're some liability, I might think that bal of imai you would have to pay. Ella, learn it from the following: Goma m'shomer sochar. We learn it from a shomer sochar. And just like a shomer sochar, bal of imai is potter. So also by a shoyel, when it's gneva and veda, bal of imai is also potter. So says the Gemara, "V'shomer suchva gufay minolim." How do we know a shomer sochar? How do we know a shomer sochar is potter with bal of imai? And says the Gemara, "Gamre chiyuvi de shomer sochar mechiyuvi de shoyel." The obligation of shomer sochar we learn from the obligation of shoyel. And therefore, ma'alahalan, just by a shoyel ba'olav poter, avkam ba'olav poter. just like over there by shoyel, if you have boil imoi, it's potter. So also by Hashem Esacha, Ba'al of Imai would also be potter. In other words, what's the most extreme situation by a shoyel? Is Shavura Mesa. And there the Torah says, Ba'al of Imai is potter. What's the most extreme case of obligation by a Hashem Esacha is Geneva Veda. And so therefore, just like by shoyel, Ba'al of Imai would potter, so also by Geneva Veda, by Hashem Esacha, Ba'al of Imai would also exempt. So the Gemara says, but my Gemara, what is your source? You're just saying, Baal of Imai is a situation by Shail. So we're going to say, Baal of Imai applies also by Hashem Esachar. That you can't say. I could say Baal of Imai only works in a situation where the liability is coming from a situation that came of a no fault. But how do you know? By Gneva Veda, Baal of Imai would exempt you from paying. Ela Amakra, the pasuk says like this: V'chi yishal vav moisav alinin rishim v'ilmin elia mitachtan. Look closely at this pasuk. It says v'chi right over here. It says v'chi. So we learn from here that just like over here by shoyel ba'al of imai, there's a concept called ba'al of imai. So the previous pasuk, which talks about a shemes sachar, also has the exemption of ba'al of imai. So therefore, you learn Elyon mitachten, the top one from the bottom one. Shemes sachar, which is on top, you learn it from shoyel. Just like shoyel patas ba'al of imai, so also shemes sachar, which is on top, also has the patur of ba'al of imai. Now, bakati shoyel misham yisachar legamar. The ikal lemikrak mal shemes sachar shekain pater b'shvura mesa time v'shash chayev b'shvura mesa. But I don't learn out. How do we know that gneva veda by shoyel is a patur of Ba'al of Imai? Because you could always say shemes sachar is pater on shvura mesa, but shoyel is chayev on shvura mesa. So maybe the exemption of Ba'al of Imai will not work by shoyel, by Gneva Veda. So that's what Gemara says. Gneva Veda b'shoyel chiyuva menolam. First of all, how do you know that Gneva Veda by shoyel there's obligation? How do you know? Maybe there is no obligation by shoyel. And says the Gemara, so the Gemara says, Daya lebav b'mikdim lias keneda. Ma Gneva Veda shem socha ba'al of imay pata. Av Gneva Veda shoyel nami ba'al of imay pata. So the Gemara just went through, and here's the exercise. Sometimes the Gemara says by one place, it says something by one situation, and it doesn't say this by the second situation, but we learn both from each other. So the Torah discusses Gneva Veda by a shemes sachar. It does not discuss Gneva Veda by a shoyel, but we have a vav that connects the two. That shoyel also is responsible by Gneva Veda, just like a shemes sachar is responsible by the Gneva Veda. And then you learn the other way around too. You learn this way, that just like a shoyel has the exemption of Ba'al of Imai, so the exemption of Ba'al of Imai also applies by shemes sachar. So whatever you're obligated to pay, if the Ba'al of Imai, if the owner is working with you, you're going to be exempt from paying. Okay, new discussion over here. Itmar. Okay, here's this discussion over here. Itmar, Pishia Babalim. Let's say the Gemara's question is Pishia Babalim. What does a Pishia Babalim mean? The Balam was totally negligent, so he would be obligated to pay. But let's say the shomer was totally negligent. The shoyel was totally negligent. He left the animal out in the street, okay? But the owner was working with him. So will he still have the exemption that he doesn't have to pay? Despite the fact that he was so negligent, but since the owner of the animal is working for the borrower, maybe he'll be exempt from paying. So the Gemara says, that was a machlokes between Rav Acha and Ravina. Chada machayev. One said that you're obligated to pay, but chada mapata. So Mande Amachayev, one said that the borrower is obligated to pay. Ksava mikra nidrish lefonav loy lefnei fonav. Hilkach im ba'al of imay asham mechinim loiksiv upshia nam b'sheich zovshay loiksiv. Hilkach b'shoy misach v'shoy lechiyuv asim ekal v'choyim mishoy mechinam. right? My timer. So basically, what the exercise that the Gemara just went through, it says like this: that since there are three psukim on the three parshias, one on top of the other, Shemechinam, Shemesacha, and Shoyal. The concept of Bal of Imai was said by Shoyal, so we only apply it to Shomer Sachar, but not to a Shemechinam. And since the only obligation of Shemechinam is Pshia, so we will not apply Ba'al of Imai, the heter Ba'al of Imai, to Shemechinam, which is two parshias above Shayal, and therefore there is no leniency a Ba'al of Imai by Shemechinam Pshia. So also there will be no leniency across the board by Shemesacha by Pshia and Shoyal by Pshia. No leniency in Ba'al of Imai. That's the first opinion. But the other opinion says Potter. The other opinion says Potter. So he darshans that the Ba'al of Imai that it says by Shoyal applies not only by Shoyal, it applies by Shemesh Sachar and applies by Shemechinam. In every which way that they're obligated to pay, they have the exemption of Ba'al of Imai. So therefore, Shemechinam has that exemption, will be liable to pay in one case by Pshia. But now we're saying that the exemption of Ba'al of Imai will apply also by Shemechinam by Pshia. So therefore, he will hold that whenever there's a Pshia, if the Ba'al of Imai, you'll be potter. Fascinating thing. So basically, let's give the case. A man is a borrower of an animal. He borrowed an animal, borrowed a cow, then takes the animal and leaves it on Central Avenue on purpose. But so normally he should be obligated to pay. You're so negligent. But what happened was during the time that he borrowed the animal, he asked the owner of the animal to do some work for him. So now that's called Ba'al of Imai. So once the owner of the animal is doing work for the borrower, even if the borrower is now negligent with the animal, he will be exempt to pay. That's this opinion. And the other holds, no, once you're negligent, you don't have the exemption of Ba'al of Imai. Now says the Gemara, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, our Mishnah that we discussed. So the Torah, the Mishnayos only give the exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shoyel, a borrower, but it does not give the exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shemechinam when Shemechinam is doing a Pshia. So we see from there, it doesn't say exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shemechinam. So therefore, it must be that the Shemechinam with Ba'al of Imai you would be liable. So this is a question according to the opinion that says you're not liable. That according to your reasoning, you do hold that there is a leniency, a Ba'al of Imai with a Shemesacha. So why doesn't it say in the Mishnah? Why does the Mishnah only discuss a Shoyel has the exemption of Ba'al of Imai and not a Shemesachar? Ella, the reason is because the Mishnah is just talking about one specific case. Tana the Milsa, we go to Amid Beis, the Ksiva Behedya. Katani, Asya Midrasha like Katani. The Tana is just reading the psukim. The reading of the psukim only states the heter of Ba'al of Imai only by a shoyel. And that's what we're discussing over here. We're not discussing Ba'al of Imai, the exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shemes Sachar, and it could be there's an exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Pshia by Shema Chinam. So it's not discussing that. So that's not a question from our brisa. So now. Tashima Shalav V'Shal Bali Ima Schar V'Sachar Bali Ima Shalav V'Sachar Bali Ima Schar V'Shal Bali Ima Av Bisha Balam Oisim Melach Mokam Acha Umesa Pata. Here, this brisa discusses the exemption of Ba'al of Imai with a renter. And what is a renter? A renter is like a Shemes Sachar. So it only discusses the Ba'al of Imai by Shemes Sachar and not by Shemechinam. So if it's already discussing Shemes Sachar, where it doesn't say the word Ba'al of Imai, why doesn't it discuss the exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shemechinam as well? It must be there is no exemption of Ba'al of Imai by Shemes Sachar, by Shemechinam. So that is a question. Savru, we felt Hamani Rabbi Yehudi, the author of this price is Rabbi Yehuda, the Amashayich renter is Geshemes Sachar Dami. Well, hi Tana Katana Milsa Dashim Drasha. This Tana is not just reading the psukim; it's extending the psukim to things that are gedarshin, are derived from the pasuk. So he's extending the concept of bal of imai by shomer sachar. But the ilu shomer like Katani, it doesn't discuss whether there is a exemption of shomer chinam by bal of imai. So how come it doesn't discuss that? Answers the Gemara, Hamani Ramei, the Amar Shaykh Shemechim and Damit, but Tana Shemechim, Buadin Shem Sacham. It actually is discussing it because a renter is a Shemechinam, and it is saying that the exemption of Bayal of Imai applies by a Shemechinam as well. Ibay is saying, actually, Rabbi Huda was the one that said a renter is a Shemechinam. So basically, you don't have a proof either way of this opinion, so the Gemara leaves it up in the air. The exemption of bal of imai, does it apply by a shemechinam or not? The Gemara leaves that unresolved. Let's do, just to state one. We'll stop in 1 minute. I just want to say that what Rav Hamnuna said, and the Gemara is just going to refute what Rav Hamnuna is about to say. Rav Hamnuna is going to say two things, and then we're going to stop over here. Rav Hamnuna says, Amar Rav Hamnuna, L'oilam yichayev ache para chorishba chamor mechama machra. What is the exemption of Baal of Imai? Is only if you borrow a cow and the owner is helping you plow with the cow. Or you borrow a donkey and the owner is helping you load things onto the donkey and guide the donkey. But if you borrow the cow and you ask the owner to help you paint your garage, that's not called Baal of Imai. That's what Rav Hamnuna says. And Rav Hamnuna is going to be refuted by that. Because a Baal of Imai is an exemption no matter what. You can borrow something, you borrow the cow and ask the guy to paint your garage, and you'll still be exempt from anything that happens to the cow. So Rav Hamnuna is going to be refuted. Another thing that Rav Hamnuna said, let's say, how long does the guy have to be working for you? Does the Baal of Imai, have to be working with you when the mishap happened to the thing that you borrowed? When you borrowed a cow and the cow died, does the owner still have to be working with you at that time in order for you to cash in on that exemption? So Rabbi Nuna said, the Balaam has to be with you not only from the time that you borrowed, but until the time of the mishap happened with the animal. And therefore, Baal means that the entire time of the borrowing period, the owner is working with you. These two things were refuted by Rav Hamnuna. In other words, you borrow a cow, and then you ask the guy to paint your garage, and then he finished painting your garage, and a week later the cow died, you're exempt. Because we refute Rav Hamnuna at the end of the page, and we're going to leave it at Tuyufta, Rav Hamnuna, Tuyufta. Okay, we'll stop right over here.
Okay, thank you.
Good
Good night, everybody.
night. Thank you.